Franklin Templeton Investments. Our unique perspective helps us see domestic and international markets in a different light. Franklin Templeton Investments. Gain from our perspective.
And by ExxonMobil. This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Key Bank, dedicated to helping people consider the financial decisions they make in their personal and professional lives. Committed to being a financial resource. More information at key.com.
Not just a singer, a phenomenon, Luciano Pavarotti.
One of the greatest voices ever.
This is his story.
Just stay the face, please.
Told by friends and colleagues. And by an awesome array of arias that helped define his life.
Pavarotti had happiness in the voice.
Thrilled to Pavarotti, a life in 7 arias, only on Great Performances.
Join us Sunday at 8 p.m.
On one special evening in 1988, rock and roll great Roy Orbison took to the stage with guests Bruce Springsteen, Elvis Costello, and many more. A concert like this can only happen once. You don't want to miss the performance. Roy Orbison and Friends, A Black and White Night.
Saturday night at 9, here on OPB.
She's real fine, my 409. Nothing can catch her.
Turn your car into a great idea. When you donate your used vehicle to OPB, we'll turn the proceeds into ideas that engage, inform, and entertain. To find out more, visit us on the web at opb.org/car or call 503-421-3273. Thanks for your support.
So at midlife, I want you to reinvent your life. You've got to reinvent yourself.
With powerful new medical information and spiritual insight, physician and author Christian Northrup invites midlife women to embrace their inner wisdom and transform the second half of their lives.
The good news is that the menopausal transition is an exciting developmental stage that changes you at the core level.
I'm Alan Cumming. Next time on Masterpiece Mystery,
your life is in danger.
Philip Pullman's intrepid Sally Lockhart.
The ruby, it's gone.
The ruby in the smoke.
I have to finish it.
On Masterpiece Mystery.
Sunday night at 10 p.m. Stein Oil Company, fueling for businesses in Clackamas, Oregon City, Milwaukee, and Tualatin.
Good evening, I'm Jim Lara. On the NewsHour tonight, the news of this Friday, which again is dominated by the financial crisis. We'll report what the president, congressional leaders, and others had to say, look at what's known about the plans for a major bailout, offer some how we got here perspective from Paul Salmon and Wall Street historian Richard Silla, report the day's reactions from the presidential candidates, and provide analysis by Mark Shields and David Brooks. Then we'll close with a report on restoring power in Texas after Hurricane Ike.
Major funding for the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer is provided by
is changing, and how we use energy today cannot be how we use it tomorrow. There is no one solution. It's not simply more oil, more renewables, or being more efficient. It's all of it. Our way of life depends on developing all forms of energy and to use less of it. It's time to put our differences aside. Will you be part of the solution? Chevron, human energy.
Pacific Life. Vestas.
And the National Science Foundation, supporting education and research across all fields of science and engineering.
And with the ongoing support of these institutions and foundations. And
this program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
A sweeping federal plan began taking shape today to rescue the financial system. The heart of it would be a purchase of bad debts from banks. That would be the largest government move into the markets since the Great Depression. But President Bush said unprecedented challenges called for unprecedented measures.
We believe that this decisive government action is needed to preserve America's financial system and sustain America's overall economy. These measures will require us to put a significant amount of taxpayer dollars on the line. This action does entail risk, but we expect that this money will eventually be paid back.
The plan could cost hundreds of billions of dollars. That's on top of more than $600 billion in federal bailouts over the last year. The president warned today adding provisions would slow action on the rescue plan. Mr. Bush gave no details, but he said this is not a time for partisanship. In response, House Speaker Pelosi said, "We are committed to quick bipartisan action." We'll have more on the crisis right after this news summary. Markets around the world rallied today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained another 368 points to close at 11,388. The NASDAQ rose more than 74 points to close at nearly 2274. For the week, after all the ups and downs, the Dow lost just 0.25%. The NASDAQ added about 0.5%. And the price of oil jumped more than $6 today to finish well above $100 a barrel again. The presidential candidates took different tacks today on the rescue plan. Republican John McCain said little about it directly. Instead, he criticized government bailouts in general and laid out several of his own recommendations. Democrat Barack Obama supported giving the Treasury broad authority. He said he'd withhold offering his own plan to avoid adding to the turmoil. We'll have more on the campaign later in the program tonight. Russian leaders were defiant today in the face of U.S. criticism. On Thursday, Secretary of State Rice warned Russia's military moves in Georgia are leading it toward isolation. But Russian Prime Minister Putin rejected that warning today. He said, confrontation is not our choice.
Our policy, our basic ideological approach remains the same. We place our stake on private initiatives, freedom of enterprise, openness, and rational integration into the world economy. And we take any attempts to take us back to Cold War times as nothing but a direct threat to our modernization.
In a separate appearance, President Medvedev insisted no outside pressure will force Moscow to change its course. As he spoke, Russian lawmakers gave initial approval to raising military spending by 25% next year. The death toll from Hurricane Ike climbed to 57 today, a week after the storm hit the Gulf Coast. In Texas, the power was back on for about 1 million customers around Houston, but more than 1.5 million were still in the dark. We'll have more on the struggle to restore power later in the program tonight. Former Congressman Mark Foley will not face charges for allegedly sending illicit messages to mail pages. The Republican from Florida resigned in 2006 after sexually explicit emails became public. But state prosecutors said today there was insufficient evidence that a crime was committed. The monthly premiums for Medicare will stay the same next year for the first time since 2000. That announcement today said it's because the health program's reserves have increased. For most people, the premiums will hold at $96.40. And that's it for the news summary tonight. Now, on the financial crisis, the push for a major bailout, some history, the candidates, and Shields and Brooks, plus bringing power back to South Texas. We begin our coverage of the financial crisis with the day's events in Washington. Ray Suarez reports.
A little more than 12 hours after he briefed members of Congress, Treasury Secretary Henry Paulson publicly outlined the latest and widest-reaching government action to stem the financial crisis.
The normal buying and selling of nearly all types of mortgage assets has become challenged. These illiquid assets are clogging up our financial system and undermining the strength of our otherwise sound financial institutions. As a result, Americans' personal savings are threatened, and the ability of consumers and businesses to borrow and finance spending, investment, and job creation has been disrupted. To restore confidence in our markets and our financial institutions so they can fuel continued growth and prosperity, we must address the underlying problem. The federal government must implement a program to remove these illiquid assets that are weighing down our financial institutions and threatening our economy. I am convinced that this bold approach will cost American families far less than the alternative: a continuing series of financial institution failures and frozen credit markets unable to fund economic expansion.
You said this needs to be a significant size. Are we talking hundreds of billions, $1 trillion?
We're talking hundreds of billions. This needs to be big enough to make a real difference and get at the heart of the problem.
Just minutes after his appearance at the Treasury, Paulson appeared at President Bush's side. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke and Chris Cox, the chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission, were also there. Mr. Bush laid out other details of the government's plan to help reassure Americans and the markets.
The Department of Treasury is acting to restore confidence in a key element of America's financial system: money market mutual funds. In the past, government insurance was not available for these funds, and the recent stresses on the markets have caused some to question whether these investments are safe and accessible. The Treasury Department's actions address that concern by offering government insurance for money market mutual funds. For every dollar invested in an insured fund, you'll be able to take $1 out. The Federal Reserve is also taking steps to provide additional liquidity to money market mutual funds, which will help ease pressure on our financial markets. The Securities and Exchange Commission has issued new rules temporarily suspending the practice of short selling on the stocks of financial institutions. This is intended to prevent investors from intentionally driving down particular stocks for their own personal gain.
The broader rescue plan for dealing with bad debt needs congressional approval. One model that could appeal to nervous investors and banks: a new federal institution like the one created during the savings and loan crisis in the late 1980s. The Resolution Trust Corporation, or RTC, bought and eventually sold off hundreds of billions of dollars of real estate assets to end the savings and loan crisis. On Capitol Hill, members of Congress said they'd try to act quickly. Minority Whip Roy Blunt.
Putting a floor under these, under the financial markets in securities particularly is an important thing to do, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something that impacts taxpayers in a negative way, but it all depends on how you put that structure together.
Senate Banking Committee Chairman Chris Dodd, who warned this morning the country was days away from a complete meltdown of our financial system, told reporters Congress would work quickly to prevent that.
That's why all of us are prepared to do whatever we can this weekend, working with the administration as they present their plan to fashion a proposal here that will get us out of this mess.
Lawmakers said they believe they could pass a bipartisan bill by the end of next week.
Now, more on what's behind the big bailout idea, and to Margaret Warner.
And for that, I'm joined by two journalists who've been covering the story closely. Krishna Guha, U.S. economics editor of the Financial Times, and Stephen Pearlstein, business and economics columnist for the Washington Post. And it's good to have you both back. Krishna, on Monday, Hank Paulson let Lehman Brothers go belly up. By Friday, he and the president are announcing this cosmic bailout. What drove them to this so quickly?
Well, look, this has been an extraordinary week in finance. The world's markets have been shaken to a degree really no one has seen in at least half a century. That's forced everybody to rethink their positions. The government has gone from trying to resist bailouts where possible and dealing with things on a case-by-case basis to realizing they've got to get ahead of the curve, try and find a way of putting out a comprehensive plan that will deal with the stress in the system.
Steve, is that how you see it, that they just had to stop this meltdown?
Yes, it's finance is a confidence game, Margaret, and this is really not about fundamentals. This is about people losing confidence in all sorts of markets and all sorts of securities, and they needed to do something to bolster the confidence.
And Steve, staying with you for a minute, so describe in broad outlines what it is they're looking at here. In other words, what are they going to do? What models are available for the government to create to assume these troubled mortgage-backed assets?
So they're going to use a model that's not unlike that, as your report said, that was used in the savings and loan crisis. And right now, there are many institutions that want to sell their asset-backed securities, their mortgage-backed securities, but there are very few buyers. And that means that the price on the few transactions that are going on are very low. They're at fire sale prices. And because of the way accounting works, every bank or anyone that holds these things has to value them at what the last sale was, which is at a very low price. So the theory is that if the government goes in now and buys them at that discounted prices, it will at least put a floor under this so that investors will know that the situation will not get any worse for the banks that sell them to the government. The government will hold them for a longer period of time until the economy and the markets presumably get better, and they'll sell them at what is a more reasonable price once it becomes clear that they're really not as toxic as everyone perhaps fears and thinks. At least that's the good scenario.
And Krishna, the theory is then what? That the banks and investment houses that right now are saddled with them will then be able to raise more capital and be able to resume normal lending or investing?
That's the theory. The idea is that if they get rid of the toxic assets, the stuff that people are scared stiff of, these are the credit products that are ultimately founded on mortgages that people think are going to go bad with the housing bust. If they can get rid of that toxic stuff, the idea is they'll have clean balance sheets, they can go back to the market and raise some more capital, get back to business, more as business as usual. The problem here, though, is if the assets are transferred at these knockdown prices that our other commentator was talking about, the banks will still have a big capital hole. They'll need to fill that somehow.
Meaning what?
Well, they'll still have much less capital than they'd like to have to back their businesses. So if they want to grow, they'll have to attract new capital. And it's likely that even once they've got rid of the really poisonous stuff, investors might be wary for some time to come.
Now, Steve, you made the analogy with the Resolution Trust Corporation of the 80s, the SNL meltdown. But there, wasn't it quite different? I mean, there were actual tangible pieces of property that were pretty easy to identify, weren't there?
Well, they were easy enough to identify because the difference there is that in the case of the RTC, the assets, it didn't really buy them. It took them over from the FDIC, which had taken over the banks, or the thrift equivalent of that. They'd taken over the thrifts and the banks. They had insured the deposits, and in exchange for that, they took over the assets, including a lot of commercial property. The problem with the RTC was that they sold it too fast. There was the feeling that, oh, the government shouldn't be in this business, that the markets might go down further, let's get rid of all of this stuff. And they really dumped it on the market, which had two effects. Number one, it made the commercial real estate recession worse because all this stuff was dumped. And secondly, many people who bought it made a fortune within 5, 6, 7 years because the real value of it became apparent, and they made a killing. And if the government had simply been patient and held on a little longer, we could have actually made money rather than losing maybe $80 billion to $100 billion.
And one other question about this, Krishna. If we're told that these mortgage-backed securities are so complicated, they've been sliced and diced and repackaged, so that even the banks and investment houses don't really know what's there or how to value them. So how is the government going to disentangle the quote-unquote toxic items and take those over and separate them from everything else?
Well, as you say, this stuff is terribly complicated. What they're going to do is they're going to take these mortgage-backed securities as a block, and then they have to figure out whether they want to disentangle them or just sit on these, if you like, as sort of packages of loans. But they don't get any simpler just because the government's holding them rather than a bank.
Steve, back to you. You mentioned what the Resolution Trust Corporation ultimately lost, or the government lost. What is the potential liability here? I mean, we heard Hank Paulson say hundreds of billions of dollars.
Well, hundreds of billions is what this new entity will be given, it's borrowed money, of course, but will be given in order to buy these assets. But if you buy $500 assets that you think are valued or are currently valued at $500 billion, doesn't mean that they're worth nothing, and so you lose $500 billion. We don't know the difference. You may lose $100 billion, you may lose $150, but you may make $100 billion. Nobody really knows that, because to know that, you'd have to know what percentage of mortgages ultimately default, and then what you recover on the defaulted mortgage. That is, do you recover 50 cents on the dollar or 70 cents? And since nobody knows that, Margaret, no one can really value them. But the feeling, I think, is that in many of these instances, these mortgage-backed securities have been driven down in price much below what is even a pessimistic view of those future for the real estate market.
Krishna, there were two other announcements by the president today, as Ray's report said, dealing with money market funds and short selling. Let's at least cover the first. Treasury said it is now going to insure money market funds. Is that all money market funds?
It'll be all money market funds that join the program, and in order to do that, they have to pay a fee. The government doesn't want to give them something for nothing here. But it's a very important move. There's about $3,500 billion sitting in these money market mutual funds.
For $3.5 trillion,
That's right.
We would say.
Yes, $3.5 trillion. And you know, a lot of this money is money that people assumed was in low-risk investments. They didn't think this was a punt on the stock market or a punt on complex securities. And the prospect of breaking the buck, of getting less than 100 cents back for every dollar you put in, has started to terrify retail investors. And if they start pulling their funds from those money market mutual funds, the ramifications for the financial markets could be very disturbing indeed. So the government has tried to get ahead of the game, said, don't worry, your money is safe, we stand behind it.
And was that already happening yesterday?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes, this was beginning to happen in the markets. I mean, in the week up until Thursday, this sector shrank by something like $150, $170 billion. So people were starting to panic.
Steve.
Yes, this is what they were deathly afraid of, Margaret. This, perhaps more than the other thing, this was their big initiative. Because if this had started to come unwound, not only would there be a sense of panic, you'd have this bank run situation we haven't seen since the New Deal, but more importantly, this market, this money market, is where most large corporations get their day-to-day working capital. And if that were to break down, it would really leak into the real economy very quickly. So they needed to regain control of this situation. And again, we don't know that necessarily money will be lost. Unlike the case of the mortgages, this is not a case where there was a lot of bad loans that need to be recognized. This was just a case of too many people going to the money markets, or potentially wanting their cash back at a time when the money markets didn't have the cash because they had used it to buy what's called commercial paper or short-term IOUs. So that was a liquidity problem. That's often is a good opportunity for government to help out, as opposed to a solvency problem, which is much more difficult.
All right, Steve, thank you so much, and Krishna Guha, Steve Pearlstein, thank you both.
Next, a bit of a history lesson about this unprecedented week on Wall Street and in Washington. Jeffrey Brown has that part of the story.
The fall of storied Wall Street institutions, huge government interventions, and a sense of spreading global panic. It has been a history-making week and one that has evoked much comparison to past crises. To look at that big picture, we're joined by Richard Silla, an economist and financial historian at New York University's Stern School of Business. And with me here is our own economics correspondent, Paul Salman. Well, Professor Silla, the comparisons have been made to the biggest crises of the past, including the Great Depression. How do you see all this?
It's similar to the crisis of the Great Depression, but it's different as well because in the Great Depression, a great deal of economic damage was done because there was not strong financial leadership in the early stages of the crisis. And so the leadership sort of came after the economic damage was done. I see this crisis as fundamentally different. It's a very big one, but I see the leadership being exerted in it, in the financial crisis itself before the economic damage is done. We're still not even sure we're in a recession in this economy. We may have one, but the leadership is coming in advance of the economic downturn, and because of it, we may have a very mild economic downturn or no downturn at all.
But you did start by saying that it was similar in some ways. How is it similar?
It's similar in that it's a worldwide crisis, and there are many financial institutions in deep trouble. And, we, in the 1930s, 1930 to 33, we lost something like 7,000 or 8,000 banks. And so that's we have the potential to do something like that now, but I think we're going to avoid it.
Paul, there's been a lot of talk all week about a reshaping of the financial system before our eyes. Investment banks falling, for example. Tell us what their role has been historically, and what does it mean if they're not there to do it anymore?
Well, investment banks have been doing two very different things. One, consulting to companies, mergers, acquisitions, reconfiguring the company, helping the company to raise money through stocks and through bonds. The other function has been trading for their own accounts with a lot of borrowed money. There's been tremendous tension within these banks. And the trading function, because of the apparent profitability of that function, has taken over in recent years. And that, of course, is what's got them into trouble. They also had retail brokers for the public, so there was a third function as well. But so there were these kind of curious hybrids, and it looks like that business model of those two functions, those two primary functions, or three if you count brokerage, is a thing of the past.
To be replaced by what? In this sense, it's coming back together of investment banks and commercial banks, which is also a throwback to the past.
Yeah, a throwback to the past. Universal banks, that's what they have in Europe. Citigroup is such a bank. You now see investment banks like Merrill being folded into Bank of America, Bear Stearns into J.P. Morgan, and so you see these universal banks, and so you imagine that these universal banks will exist. And then there will be what investment banks used to be back in the days when I first started covering this stuff, smaller, boutique-y, private consultants, advisors, helping companies raise money and figure out how to proceed financially.
Professor Silla, do you see a changing of the business model that and lessons that come out of past crises as well?
Yeah, it's sort of paradoxical that in the Great Depression of the 1930s, we decided that the solution to the problem was to break up universal banks, as Paul talked about, and to the Glass-Steagall Act separated commercial from investment banking. And that was the model for the next 60 years. But at the end of the 1990s, we repealed the Glass-Steagall Act and allowed huge organizations like Citigroup and some of the others. And now the solution to this financial crisis is to fold the investment banks back into the commercial banks. So there's a little bit of irony or paradox there.
Now, Paul, if we look at the regulatory side, the role of government. Now, you've been reporting on this since the 70s. This issue of the relationship between Washington and Wall Street, regulation, deregulation. What have you seen develop over the last 30-some years?
30-some years it is, Jeff, and unbroken deregulation, starting in the Carter administration, ratcheted up enormously in the Reagan administration, continuing, maybe plateauing a little bit in the first Bush administration, the Clinton administration, and then taking off again in the current Bush administration. The idea that markets will reward winners, punish losers. And we've been the beacon for that in the world economy, our financial system doing that. We now have the curious situation in which we're not letting the losers be punished.
But we've also seen times when the government steps in. We just heard Margaret's discussion talking about the RTC, savings alone. You and I covered that a while back, and we've seen other examples.
Yes, no, it's not. I wouldn't say, and that's why I said you saw less of it under Bush 1. I mean, that was the example, that in that era, no, there was more government intervention. But by and large, the secular trend, as they say, has been absolutely towards more and more deregulation. The market will out, free market fundamentalism, people call it, creative destruction. But the destruction is not being allowed here, or at least it's being severely limited as we become a country that bails out, you know, free market institution after free market institution. The freest market institutions you got, the ones on Wall Street.
Well, Professor Silla, you started this conversation talking about how regulators now are learning from, well, going back to the Great Depression. What specific things are they looking at? What do you look at when you think about what should be done now?
Well, I think the Depression teaches us that the result of a major financial crisis is going to be regulatory reform. In the Depression of the 30s, we ended up getting the FDIC, deposit insurance, the Securities and Exchange Commission, regulations to promote mutual funds, various changes. And it's my impression that the same thing will happen, not right away, but in the next couple of years when we look back at this crisis. And you know, Secretary Paulson outlined last spring, February or March, a set of guidelines for reforming our regulation. We really need to reform it because it's sort of an early 20th century regulatory system. The problem with it is that we have these separate regulators looking at little bits and parts of the financial system, whereas we've developed a financial system that's one big network now, and we need regulation that looks at the whole system. The example of, you know, institutions used to write mortgages and hold them. And in the last 30 years, we've taken those mortgages, securitized them, sold them to investors all over the world. It's a different system. The SEC and the banking regulators need to understand that the system is much more of a network now and needs a more, shall we say, holistic approach to regulation.
Paul, one last issue, which is the global nature of all this. What we've all seen over the last decades is globalized markets and therefore now globalized crises. Based on what you have seen over these years and looking at what's happening now, is it potentially history-making in the sense of how we think of New York, Wall Street, even the United States as the central component of this global system?
Well, Ed Yardeni, the economist, uses the term Fedi, not Franny, not Fanny, not Freddie, I'm getting it, but Fedi. That is, the federal government is now the biggest, Dick, you should comment on this, is the biggest taxpayer-owned bank in the world now, Fedi?
Right. I mean, the government turns out to be the ultimate risk manager.
Yeah, and so that's a sea change. I mean, that is a huge change. The world has looked at us for years as the pioneers of financial engineering, and that's been one of America's competitive strengths in recent years, presumably. Suddenly, it looks like not only did we overstep, but we can't even sustain that system. We're going to close that system down. That would seem to me to be a huge, huge change in America's economic position in the world.
All right. Paul Solman and Richard Silla, thanks both very much.
Paul Solman addressed several of your questions this week on his online business desk. You can find it at pbs.org. As always, just scroll down when you get there and click on NewsHour Reports. And now, how the presidential candidates responded today to the financial crisis. Judy Woodruff reports.
The presidential nominees reacted differently to the latest steps to address the financial crisis. Republican John McCain was in attack mode when he spoke in Green Bay, Wisconsin, before the president and Treasury Secretary Paulson. McCain said there are certainly plenty of places to point fingers.
The financial crisis that we're living through today started with the corruption and manipulation of our home mortgage system. At the center of the problem were the lobbyists, politicians, and bureaucrats who succeeded in persuading Congress and the administration to ignore the festering problems at Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
McCain then criticized the federal government's moves to address the financial meltdown.
The Federal Reserve should get back to its core business of responsibly managing our money supply and inflation. It needs to get out of the business of bailouts. The Fed needs to return to protecting the purchasing power of the dollar. A strong dollar will reduce energy and food prices. It will stimulate sustainable economic growth and get this economy moving again.
Barack Obama followed 2 hours later, after the president and Mr. Paulson, and backed the government's decision to intervene in the crisis.
Today, I fully support the efforts of Secretary Paulson and Federal Reserve Chairman Bernanke to work in a bipartisan spirit with Congress to find a solution of this sort. What we're looking at right now is to provide the Treasury and the Federal Reserve with as broad authority as is necessary to stabilize markets and to maintain credit. We also need a more institutional response to create a system that can manage some of the underlying problems with bad mortgages, help homeowners stay in their homes, protect the retirement and savings of working Americans. I think it's critical at this point that the markets and the public have confidence that their work will be unimpeded by partisan wrangling and that leaders in both parties work in concert to solve the problem at hand.
Obama stressed the urgency of putting the country's capital markets on sound footing first, so there will be stability and changes can be made to financial regulations later.
We're going to have to take some critical steps, and I think the next administration has to be committed to upgrading those financial regulations. But right now, what we have to do is make sure that the capital markets are working so that people, small businesses, folks who are waking up in the morning know that their money market funds are protected. They know that they can make payroll, and that as much as possible, we are able to ensure that on Main Street, some of the pain is limited. And I think what has to be clear is that whatever is set up is not bailing out shareholders and CEOs. They need to take their losses because they were enjoying the upside when the times were good.
McCain did not comment on the steps announced by the administration when he appeared at a rally this afternoon in Minnesota. Instead, he tried to tie Obama to the housing crisis by citing contributions the Democrat has received from Fannie and Freddie employees.
We've heard a lot of words from Senator Obama over the course of this campaign, but maybe just this once he could spare us the lectures and admit to his own poor judgment in contributing to these problems. The crisis on Wall Street, my friends, started in the Washington culture of lobbying and influence peddling, and he was right square in the middle of it.
McCain did not mention that his presidential campaign has received $169,000 from directors, officers, and lobbyists of Fannie and Freddie, more than 10 times what Obama has received from them. This, according to the Federal Election Commission.
And that brings us to the analysis of Shields and Brooks, syndicated columnist Mark Shields, New York Times columnist David Brooks. David, you wrote in your column today that the candidates' reaction to the financial crisis has been, quote, moronic, end quote. Would you flesh that out a little?
Yeah, I guess I'd amend it to say nauseatingly stupid. At least for the first 4 days. I think today was an improvement. Listen, you've got this incredibly complicated situation. You have subprime mortgages. You've got these foreign investment flows. You've got accounting these mark-to-market standards. You've got a whole range of highly sophisticated derivatives that have all fed into this crisis, an incredibly complicated crisis. So for the first 4 days, the two candidates essentially treat us as kindergartners. Barack Obama doesn't seem to know what's causing the crisis, but he knows George Bush must be to blame. John McCain gives no evidence of appreciating the complexity of the crisis, but he knows there are some really bad people on Wall Street who are selfish and who must be punished. And by the way, there's this guy, Chris Cox, he's bad too. And so the descriptions of the crises were insultingly stupid and insultingly partisan. When you got a situation like this, a week like this, when the whole world is tremendously nervous about where the whole economy is going, it seems to me it's time to elevate the tone and get a little grown-up. And for the first 4 days, there was none of that. Now, today, I think they did do that.
Both of them?
I think both of them. Obama got there with Bob Rubin and Laura Tyson and Larry Summers and Gene Sperling, serious people, and issued a statement which wasn't daring by any means. It was anodyne, but it was sober and responsible. It was fine. McCain gave this speech in South Bend, a pretty substantive speech about what he would do in the to address the crisis, not directly on this, but generally. And so today they stepped it up a notch, and I think they achieved mediocrity for the whole week. But in the beginning, the partisan tone, the standard, lipstick on a pig tone prevailed, and it was insane.
Insane? Moronic?
No, I don't think so. I think David's level of expectation, his own standards are quite high. This was an unprecedented crisis. I think they were too partisan. I don't think they were. I think that it was revealing. A crisis reveals where people come from and how they think. And in that sense, I think that we have no reason to expect that a policy answer of this complexity, of this cosmic reach, is going to be developed by a campaign. That campaigns don't do that.
Why not? Why can't
because
they do it?
that is what campaigns do. Look what it took. It took the entire Treasury Department, the Federal Reserve Board, all of their experts, the Congress, the administration, and they had 4 bites at it and came up with this today. So, I mean, the idea that on the run, a political campaign that is out trying to win votes is going to compete with that in terms of depth and dimension. But that aside, I think the important question really about this week is the reaction. And Jeffrey Frankel of Harvard put it, I thought, perfectly well. He said, just as there are no foxholes, there are no atheists in a foxhole, there are no libertarians in a financial crisis. I mean, all of the good folks who told us hands off, laissez-faire, no government, I don't know where they are. They've suddenly become Marcel Marceau. They've gone mute on us. Everybody wants Sam in there, and you can feel the irresistible wave for regulation.
You feel that too, David? Is that coming, whether anybody likes it or not?
Well, I think in the short term it is. I mean, I sort of am sympathetic to this bailout or whatever we want to call it, because I think we're going to have a tough time regulating such a complicated series of markets.
We're talking about the one that Paulson is working on now, this weekend,
Nouveau,
everybody.
RTC.
Yeah.
But we do have to make sure that when people fail in this system, that we can contain the failure so it doesn't have these cascading effects. And I hope when Congress looks into this, they'll ask, how are we going to price the assets that are going to be sold off to the government? Are people just going to be dumping their rotten stuff on us as taxpayers? So I hope there's some scrutiny, but I think there is a general sense that the government in these extraordinary circumstances has to act, which is not the same as saying we've got to regulate, highly regulate financial markets and really take away their innovation. But I would just say one political thing. I think Palin and McCain have been remarkably slow to embrace what's happening. I'm sort of struck by that. Well, that Palin gave a comment yesterday saying she was against bailouts, and McCain was sort of not talking too much about it. But he's tiptoeing very slowly. I'm really struck by that.
He will. I mean, McCain, has had several.
Well, he said it again today, though, but about the Fed, the Federal Reserve.
I know he did.
Got to get out of the bailout.
But he was, he was against the AIG bailout. Then he was for it. I mean, he's had a stop and start week, and I think that it's not been you can say it's not been a great week for Obama on the issue. It's been a really disastrous week for John McCain on the issue. But I think, Jim, what we're looking at here is that the sense of regulation. I get a kick out of, we can't have too much regulation. who bought out, who bailed out the failing giant when Merrill Lynch, and it turned out to be the Bank of America, which is a highly regulated industry. I mean, the banks are highly regulated. These have been the less regulated and the deregulated parts of our financial community that are in trouble.
That's not... The least regulated parts of our financial community are the hedge funds, which are not doing so bad. The highly regulated investment banks are doing bad, and the most regulated are Fannie and Freddie, who are doing terribly. So it's a complicated situation, and I would say I would separate two things. One, the difficulty, the desirability of regulating so we don't have messes like this. Believe me, it's desirable. But the difficulty of doing that in incredibly complicated instruments that the CEOs of the companies don't even understand, let alone lowly paid regulators in D.C. It would be nice, but it's difficult. But that's one question. The separate question is, what do we do now in a crisis situation?
What do you feel? How do you feel about that? Forget the regulation part, just the saving part, which is what is the basis of this.
I think there's look at. I don't pretend to be an economist. I wasn't John McCain's class, but I will say this, that I think there's no question there's a consensus that the crisis and that there has to be a response. I mean, the irony is...
So if they don't create this, they're going to have to do something to keep the...
They're going to create
the market.
They're going to create this.
Alive. Okay.
And I'll tell you why. I mean, because you've got a Republican Treasury Secretary, a Republican Chairman of the Federal Reserve, a Democratic Speaker of the House, a Democratic Senator, Republican administration. They've come up with it. I mean, McCain will support it because he's been triangulated. The Republican administration has said, I've come up with this, said the president, with the Democratic Congress. I mean, Paulson, the administration has been blessed with two people, apparently, Hank Paulson and Bob Gates. I mean, those are the two stars of this administration, and this crisis has come on his plate and his watch.
Do you agree Paulson deserves some great credit for this?
I think so. I actually think Bush has had an outstanding 3 years. You start with the surge. The last few years of his administration have been pretty good. In part, I mean, it's Paulson, Gates, and other people. But in part, you know, it's his administration. He should get a little credit at the end of the day. If there's just one political point, I think this is really going to change the climate of the election. And that's because people are much more nervous about where things are going. And to me, that works in two different ways. One, it obviously increases the desire for change. But in times of economic turmoil, there's a flee to safety. And so to me, the key for the candidates is to say change with safety. And if I were Barack Obama, I'd have Bob Rubin on my side every second of the day.
Do you think it's going to change the campaign dramatically?
Well, I think it's first of all, 6 weeks before an election, you're going to have members of Congress casting a tough vote. It's going to be a tough vote to cast.
To vote for this?
Sure it is, because it's $1 trillion, Jim.
Yeah, but isn't everybody
It's $1 trillion. It means that the next administration will be able to do precious little. I mean, we have committed now, at this point, already $500 billion in the bailout of Bayer and Merrill and
now
AIG rather, and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. I mean, you know, this is unfunded liabilities of the federal government. This is our indebtedness. So, you know, the grand plans that anybody has, I think, are very much on hold. So I do think it's going to mean this. One of John McCain's longest and strongest supporters said to me at the Republican convention in St. Paul, any day that the economy is not on the front page and George Bush is not center for, is good day for John McCain. I think this guarantees that the economy is going to be the issue, and that is not where you wanted the election if you're the Republicans.
Do you agree with that? That this favors, or let's say disfavors McCain and the Republicans?
If Obama can show that he's got statesmen around him, I do think it generally favors him. I'm not sure it'll cost $1 trillion because we don't know how much they'll resell these assets, but it certainly will cost a lot, hamper the next president, and it's extremely likely now we'll have a long recession because of because the banks have to work through all this debt. And they won't be lending, they won't be aggressively lending, and I just think there's a much greater chance that we're going to have a downturn, not a steep downturn, but according to the economists I've spoken to, a longer period of recession, which will affect the administration significantly.
Either administration.
Right, exactly.
And a concern about inflation as well. I think, to Obama's credit, he has one of the qualities that come through, I mean, it's an advantage to him for the first time to have only been in Washington for 4 years. Because the consensus answer on both sides is this has been festering for a long time. It was 1999 legislation, it's been deregulation of Reagan, it's been 25 years building. So the fact that Obama's only been here for 4 years, for all of a sudden becomes an advantage to him.
Yeah, I think it cuts both ways. People want silverbacks. They want somebody who's been around in a time like this. They want a guy like Paulson, who's chairman of Goldman Sachs. I think they want a guy like Rubin. If I were both of the candidates, I would surround with experienced old hands who seem kind of safe.
I'm curious about your point that this is a good time for George W. Bush, and the biggest financial crisis in a long time.
I personally don't think George Bush or any politician is primarily responsible for this. Okay. I would say he's had the surge, and I think in the last month, the response by the federal government has been pretty good.
Nobody has been Paul Revere on this. I mean, McCain hasn't, Bush hasn't, Obama hasn't. I mean, as far as this crisis is concerned, I mean, that said, hey, this is coming. We have had some people on the show, the fellow from NYU and others have been sounding that alarm. David is in a distinct minority because as the polls have changed, as John McCain went up and he went down, as Obama went up and down and then back up again, George Bush has stayed at 30. I mean, the consensus on the candidates, the direction of the country, everything else changed slightly. It's been a constant 30% favorable. So, you know, maybe David is seeing something that history
I'm taking the lofty view of history, the David McCulloughs of the 22nd century.
Oh, well, I mean, this is a guy that was using the word moronic two paragraphs ago, now taking the long view of history. I mean,
we'll leave that word aside and say
flexible.
Good night to you both. Thank you. And finally tonight, Hurricane Ike. NewsHour correspondent Tom Bearden has been reporting on recovery efforts in Texas all this week. Tonight he has a Science Unit report on restoring electrical power.
I'll have to throw some more on ice.
It hasn't been an easy week for Houston residents Michael Williams, his wife Lydia Luz, and their 8-year-old son Alex. Their electricity,
might as well use it,
and the power to much of southeast Texas failed as Hurricane Ike came ashore. No lights, no refrigerator, no stove since early Saturday morning. They finished eating all of their perishable food several days ago.
You know, the first couple of days it's sort of an adventure and it's like camping, and we've camped before and we have our cook stove, but now I call it Ike fatigue. You know, you're just kind of tired. The first thought I have in the morning is, here's another day, you know, of like, okay, am I going to be able to find ice? You know, I'm going to be able to entertain Alex.
They have a lot of company in their misery. At one point, Hurricane Ike knocked out power for 5 million Americans.
So you're hot all the way up to here now.
Joe Domino is the CEO of Entergy Texas, the electric utility that serves cities and towns from the Louisiana border nearly to Dallas, excluding Houston.
How badly damaged is your system? In this particular hurricane, of the 395,000 customers that we had, we really knocked out 392,000. So all but 3,000 customers were affected by this particular hurricane. And Beaumont's all up in here.
The sheer size of the failure is best illustrated by a giant diagram in Entergy's Transmissions Operations Center in Beaumont. Like other power systems, Entergy's grid is a network of interconnecting power lines which provide alternate pathways for electricity. It's designed to handle small failures, but the grid goes dark when too many lines go down. In the display, Louisiana is on the right, Texas on the left, representing a system that covers nearly 28,000 square miles. Anything that's lit up isn't working. Billy Reynolds manages the center.
The best thing we ever see is darkness. So, and you see on this side here in the Lake Charles area, it is dark. Everything's back to normal there. This Texas side is, we're working on it, you know. It's been 6 days and you know, we're doing pretty good. It's coming.
Not surprisingly, the #1 question people are asking is, when do my lights come back on? The second is, why is it taking so long? Customer service manager Sam Buffet hears those questions all day long.
Okay, Gary, we'll get that done as quick as we can.
His phone never stops ringing. He took us on a tour of damaged power lines around Beaumont. He says all of the various components of the grid have to be fixed before power can be restored. For example, the company's Sabine generating station was flooded. All the switches have to be cleaned and a cooling tower repaired. Then the big transmission lines that distribute high voltages over long distances have to be pulled back upright, and some of those are very difficult to get to.
A lot of time in this area, we'll be using specialized equipment, tracked vehicles, flotation type equipment with the tracks on it that we can get through these marshy areas.
At the same time, damaged substations and neighborhood power lines also have to be repaired.
In the neighborhoods, we have substations that step that high voltage power down to a lower voltage, which we call distribution voltage, which carries it through the neighborhoods up to someone's house, and then it's stepped down near the house through a little transformer that actually gets the power into the house. All of those are very important to making the entire connection between the power plant, where the electricity is generated, to your home where you actually use the electricity.
It all has to work because generation has to precisely match the demand for electricity. If it doesn't, the grid will fail.
So you've got to go step by step as you restore the process.
Yes, sir, step by step. And it's a kind of long process because as you come up, you got to balance the generation with the load. If you get a little high, you got to come back down, and you're always balancing. It's a big balancing act.
It's difficult. It's complicated. It's a ballet. It's guys over here working on the transmission system at the same time that other crews are working on our distribution system, and people in the middle working on substations and making sure the power plants have load on them and are running and available when we need them.
It takes a lot of very skilled people to repair a damaged power grid, far more than any single utility could afford to keep on the payroll year-round.
Papermakers, they go on to take it 56-0, the final. All right, it is time to head back to Gresham High School. Craig Bird back out there tonight for our Pacific Office Automation Play of the Night. Craig?
Yeah, as a member of the Superfans, we had to be here for it because we have to have the Pacific Automation Play of the Night here in Gresham. And yeah, guess what? We're going back to our game here at the Gophers. They were down by 6, and Michael Melhoff, the big D lineman's going to get the pick, and no one's catching him. He's taking it back, and the Gophers are undefeated and celebrating a perfect 4-0 record. That is your Pacific Automation Play of the Night.
All right. Thanks, Craig. Boy, one of our biggest crowds ever. All right, we'll be right back. More with High School Blitz.
It's Toyota's National Clearance Event, the perfect time for amazing deals and selection. But time is running out. Get 0% APR on Toyota trucks like the 2008 Motor Trend Truck of the Year, the Toyota Tundra. You can also get $3,000 cash back on Tundra. Or for a limited time, drive home the rugged Tacoma and get $1,750 cash back. So don't miss this opportunity to save big at the Toyota National Clearance Event. Hurry into your Toyota dealer today.
Steve, what are you wearing? I told you to wear a cowboy outfit.
I did.
Not those cowboys. Besides, why would you wear a football uniform for Buster's commercial?
It's football season, Buster.
So?
Nothing makes people hungrier for delicious and tender hand-rubbed, slow-smoked Texas-style barbecue than hard-hitting pigskin action.
Pigskin action?
Buster's baby back, spare ribs, pulled pork, and links.
That does sound good. Tell them where to go.
Buster's Barbecue.
Welcome to Fabric Depot, the largest, most complete fabric store in the country. With over 20,000 fabrics to choose from, we'll have everything you're looking for quilting, home decorating, bridal, and fashion fabrics. Bring your creativity and imagination. Fabric Depot will have whatever inspires you. Island Batik, leaders in innovative batik designs. See our colorful selection now. For great savings, visit the largest fabric store in the country today or shop online. Fabric Depot.
I really don't know exactly what's going on down there, but it's massive.
Massive is right. It's all about the big deal at Tonkin Gresham Honda's Extended Honda Summer Clearance. Get the absolute lowest prices of the year. A Civic LX 4-door automatic for just $139 a month. And for only $10 more at Gresham Honda, get an Accord LXP 4-door automatic for just $149 a month. That's the big deal. Get it at Gresham Honda or GreshamHonda.com.
High School Blitz, brought to you by Leif's Auto Collision Centers, Pacific Office Automation, and Buster's Texas Style Barbecue.
Congratulations to Gresham High School. Thanks for joining us. You can catch all our highlights on our website at KHU.com.
Field Spots!
Zenner Sausage Company presents Oktoberfest at Oaks Amusement Park, September 19th through the 21st. German beer, brats, and bands, plus cooking shows, vendors, wiener dog races, Kinderplots, and more. Hey, don't forget that chicken dance.
Introducing a broadband revolution that starts at your wallet. Cricket Broadband. I can surf, chat, upload, and download whatever I need, whenever I need it. And since it's mobile, it goes from the coffee shop
to the desktop without missing a beat. So instead of getting dial tone, I'm getting right down to business.
Don't settle for dial-up. Affordable unlimited broadband is here thanks to new Cricket Broadband. Super fast and only $40 a month. No contracts, no overages. Call 1-800-718-4136. Now, high speed is my speed for only like $1.33 a day. Call 1-800-718-4136 and for a limited time get the USB modem for just $59, a savings of over $100. Plus, get your first month of service free.
In my high-speed world, I need high-speed internet.
Get high-speed internet for just $1.33 a day. Call, click, or come in today. Cricket Broadband. Real unlimited, unreal savings.
Pacific Office Automation, the West's #1 office technology dealer. Over 30 years of award-winning sales, service, and customer support, featuring the most respected names in state-of-the-art office technology. Whether your company is small or large, Pacific Office Automation is the name to trust for all your document imaging needs. Locally owned, nationally recognized, the one name to remember, Pacific Office Automation.